It was the first week of classes at Pine Valley High School, and nearly every seat in the history classroom was occupied when Ellis Parker walked in. Walking carefully, with his back straight and his materials under his arm, he noticed students whispering, some heads turning discreetly in his direction. Ellis was the only black student in the class, and he could already feel the weight of judgment and expectation in every look. Mr. Martin, a teacher with rigid features and calculated gestures, noticed the movement at the door. Ellis quickly found a seat in the back, focusing his gaze on the whiteboard ahead, ignoring the glances around him. Martin studied the new student for a moment, with a slight frown. He was a conservative man who valued order and manners above all else. To him, Ellis seemed out of place. Martin, as usual, started the class with a brief introduction to the semester's content. After a few minutes, he handed out a historical article to the students and asked them to start reading aloud, each taking a turn. The readings proceeded monotonously until Ellis's turn arrived. "Parker, could you read the next paragraph?" Martin called out, not hiding his expression of distrust. Ellis, confident, began reading in a steady voice. However, before he could finish the first sentence, Martin interrupted. Wait, Parker, try articulating your words better, will you?" "Here, we value clarity and proper language," said Martin, without softness. Ellis's classmates glanced at each other, some smirking. Ellis remained calm and resumed reading, carefully pronouncing each word. Yet Martin interrupted again, this time with an impatient expression. "It seems you're having trouble understanding the text, Parker. Maybe it'd be better if you paid more attention in future readings, rather than just saying whatever comes to mind." Martin's voice was firm, but there was a hint of mockery that cut deep. Ellis felt his face heat up. He couldn't believe his teacher was belittling him in front of everyone, at his very first chance to make a good impression. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Some students looked away, embarrassed by the situation, while others, more relaxed, stifled laughter. The humiliation was palpable, and at that moment, a spark of determination ignited within Ellis, who bit his lip, his eyes fixed on the paper in his hands. When the reading was finally over, Ellis stayed silent, holding Martin's gaze with as much dignity as he could muster, keeping his focus unwavering. The class continued as if nothing had happened, but the sting of humiliation lingered, present in the glances of a few students who avoided looking directly at Ellis. The following week, the tension between Ellis and Mr. Martin hadn't faded. Martin, who had a habit of testing students, wasn't about to ease up on the new kid. In fact, he seized every opportunity to assert his control. One Thursday morning, Martin decided to assign an interpretation exercise. He handed out a copy of a famous historical speech and instructed the students to read it and then discuss the main ideas. As he paced around the room, he observed each student with a stern, evaluative gaze until he stopped in front of Ellis, who was reading quietly, absorbed in the text. "Parker, stand up," Martin ordered in a loud, abrupt voice. Ellis hesitated for a moment, but then stood, holding the paper with both hands. Martin crossed his arms, giving a slight, sideways smile, as though he anticipated what would happen next. "I want you to read the main passage. And please, don't forget to articulate properly," he said, stressing the last sentence with a tone of irony that didn't escape the student's attention. Ellis started to read, doing his best to ignore his nerves. The words came out slowly and calmly, but he didn't get far. Martin interrupted him abruptly. "Is that really how you intend to express yourself? It's hard to understand. Make a bigger effort, Parker. We're waiting," Martin said impatiently. A ripple of muffled laughter spread through the room. Feeling the weight of the stairs behind him, Ellis adjusted his posture and tried to continue reading, focusing even harder on enunciating each word. But before he could finish, Martin interrupted again. "Let's have another student finish since you're struggling so much, Parker. Perhaps interpreting complex texts isn't your strong suit." The humiliation was palpable, and a heavy silence settled over the students. Some glanced out the window, embarrassed, while others, more uninhibited, laughed. Ellis swallowed hard, his face hot and his stomach knotted, but he refused to let his emotions show. With a final look of disdain, Martin called on a different student to continue the reading. Sitting back down, Ellis kept his head high, though the shame gnawed at him inside. He didn't need to say anything. The silence and the tension in his posture said it all. After class, while the students gathered their things, a classmate passed by Ellis and gave him a light tap on the shoulder, a silent gesture of support. The school counselor, Marlene, who had noticed Martin's behavior from day one, watched the scene from a distance, her gaze concerned. Ellis knew that the humiliation wasn't just about him. It was something bigger, the prejudice he knew he'd face there. Though he wasn't yet sure how to respond, a spark of determination grew within him, urging him to stand firm. The next morning, Ellis felt the weight of people's eyes on him as he walked into school. He wasn't just the new kid. He was now the new kid that the history teacher seemed intent on belittling. As he made his way to his locker, he noticed students whispering and glancing at him. Taking a deep breath, he began organizing his books, only to be interrupted by a calm but firm voice. "Hey, Ellis." He turned to see Genevieve, a tall, red-haired girl who was usually surrounded by the popular crowd. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I saw what happened yesterday," she said, getting straight to the point, "and I think the way he treated you was wrong." Ellis, surprised, simply nodded. He hadn't expected anyone from Genevieve's group, who always seemed caught up in their own world, to reach out. But in that instant, he saw sincerity in her eyes, a kind of understanding he hadn't anticipated. "Thanks for saying that," he replied, steady and polite, though inwardly grateful for her support. Genevieve looked at him thoughtfully. "You're stronger than you seem, you know? Maybe you should show everyone that." She smiled slightly before moving to join her friends, who were waiting nearby. Ellis watched her walk away, feeling, for the first time, that he might not have to face this battle alone. Later, during lunch, Marlene, the counselor, who had noticed the situation, approached him in the hallway. She was a gentle woman in her 50s, known for her empathy. Gently touching his arm, she gestured for a quick conversation. "Ellis, I noticed what happened with Mr. Martin. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Ellis looked at her, surprised she'd noticed. "Thank you, Mrs. Marlene," he replied, with a slight sigh. She gave him a warm, encouraging smile. "I know you're new here, but believe me, your presence matters. And who knows, maybe you can do more than just attend classes," she added, leaving a subtle hint. "You can always count on me." Marlene's support was an unexpected relief. Combined with Genevieve's kindness, it gave Ellis the strength to consider standing up. On Monday morning, as the principal's voice echoed over the school intercom, he announced that nominations for the class leader election were open, and any interested students had until the end of the week to sign up. News of the election spread quickly through the class, and there was a buzz of excitement. Becoming class leader offered not only visibility but also a seat on the student council, where they could represent their classmates and make their voices heard. Ellis remained silent, though he felt tempted to participate. Genevieve and Marlene's words still echoed in his mind. He knew this might be a chance to prove his worth not only to others, but to himself. Yet, the insecurity weighed on him. He wasn't sure he wanted to expose himself even more to Martin's scrutiny. At lunchtime, Genevieve approached him as he sat alone, contemplating the idea. She smiled, sitting down beside him with her lunch. "Ellis, you heard about the election for class leader, right?" she asked straightforwardly. Ellis nodded, somewhat reluctantly, shrugging. "Yeah, but I don't think it's for me, you know? I'm new here and, well, it feels like some people have already decided I'm not good enough." Genevieve gave a soft laugh, as if she'd heard a silly joke. "Listen, I've never seen you back down, not even with everything going on. Who cares what Martin or anyone else thinks? You're exactly the kind of person we need in that role." Ellis looked at her in surprise, struck by her straightforwardness. He glanced around the cafeteria, noticing a few familiar faces, including Robert and Sylvia, who seemed interested in the conversation. Genevieve motioned for them to join, and they came over. "If you run, you've got my vote, man," Robert said with a grin, giving him a thumbs up. "Martin's put me through a lot too, so I know you're tougher than he thinks." Sylvia nodded seriously. "He keeps putting you down, Ellis. But if you're our leader, you'll have the chance to show everyone what actually matters." Ellis felt a shift inside him. Their words reminded him that he wasn't alone and that he had real support. For a few seconds, he stayed quiet, weighing his options and what it would mean to take on this role. Later that afternoon, while closing his locker, he noticed Marlene in the hall. She smiled knowingly, as if she could read his thoughts. "Ellis, I heard a little rumor that you're thinking of running for class leader. I'd love to see that happen." Ellis took a deep breath and returned her smile. "I think it might be time, Mrs. Marlene." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. A class leader is more than just a title. It's a chance to show that respect and dignity matter. That evening, he officially signed up, determined to turn his friend's support into something real. He knew that from now on, his strength would be put to the test in public. The next morning, the list of nominees for class leader was posted on the main hallway board. Ellis's name was there, and he noticed a few students stopping to read it, visibly surprised by his candidacy. He held his head high and continued to the history classroom, knowing he'd soon face Martin once again. When he entered, he noticed Martin already there, arranging some papers on his desk. The room, normally quiet before class, seemed different. Some students observed him with curiosity, as if they were expecting something to happen. When Martin raised his gaze and saw Ellis, his face took on a hard-to-read expression, a mix of surprise and disdain. As Ellis sat, Martin walked over slowly, stopping by his desk. His voice lowered, so only Ellis could hear, but his tone was sharp. "I see you've decided to run for class leader, Parker," he said, with a slight, ironic smile. "Interesting. I was expecting someone more capable." Ellis swallowed, forcing himself to hold his ground without showing the insecurity he felt. "I think I have what it takes, sir," he replied, his voice steadier than he'd anticipated. Martin scrutinized him for a second, as if weighing each word. "Leadership requires preparation, Parker. It requires experience. It's not something just anyone can do," he added with clear disdain. "I only hope you know what you're getting into." The teacher's tone made Ellis's heart race. He knew this was the moment to show Martin he wouldn't be intimidated. Taking a deep breath, he kept his voice steady. "I believe leadership is more about respect and commitment than experience, sir." Martin was silent for a brief moment, visibly disturbed by Ellis's unexpected response. He straightened, gave Ellis a final look, and returned to the front of the room. The students, who'd been watching quietly, exchanged glances. The tension in the room was unmistakable. Class continued, but the exchange between Ellis and Martin seemed to linger in the air. Some students glanced admiringly at Ellis, who, without a word, maintained his confident posture. By standing up to Martin, he felt as if he'd taken a huge step toward freeing himself from the pressure. After class, Genevieve and Robert waited for him in the hallway. Genevieve had a proud smile on her face. "You were incredible in there, Ellis. I've never seen Martin so speechless." Robert gave him a light tap on the shoulder, chuckling. "Feels good to see someone stand up to him." It was about time. Ellis returned their smiles, though he still felt the lingering impact of what had just happened. But knowing he had his friends and classmates behind him, the pressure seemed lighter. He knew that the path ahead would still be challenging, but at that moment, he realized he wouldn't back down. The following day, Ellis arrived early, determined to share his ideas with his classmates. He knew his candidacy wasn't just about popularity. It was about proving to everyone that respect and integrity should guide the person representing them. During the break, he gathered his classmates in the courtyard and spoke with a steady voice and a determined look. "I know some of you might wonder why I decided to run. I'm new here, and I know that matters. But I believe I can help our class be heard." The students listened intently. Ellis saw genuine interest in their eyes, giving him the courage to continue. "I have a few ideas for representing our class. I want our voice to be heard by the student council, and I want our opinions to be taken seriously. I'm proposing more group activities so everyone can feel involved and valued. And I'll push for more guidance programs for students preparing for their future." The reaction was one of surprise and approval. Many hadn't expected such committed proposals. Genevieve smiled supportively at his side, and he saw admiration in her eyes. Robert was listening closely, nodding in agreement. After the presentation, some classmates approached him, offering support and praising his ideas. A quiet classmate named Clara shyly commented, "Ellis, I really liked your proposals. I think we need someone who genuinely cares about our class." He thanked her with a genuine smile, touched by the unexpected support. Each encouraging word fueled his determination. Ellis started to see that this was more than just a campaign. It was a real connection with his classmates, something that extended beyond the classroom walls. That same day, he began distributing flyers with his proposals, which Genevieve had helped him prepare. As he walked through the hallways handing them out, he noticed Martin watching from afar with a serious, skeptical expression. But Ellis held firm. Each step forward felt like a victory. The big day had finally arrived, and a sense of anticipation filled the school. Since early that morning, the hallways were buzzing with students talking about the candidates. Ellis was more nervous than he'd admit, but he tried to keep his composure. He knew that this was more than just an election. It was his chance to prove to everyone, including himself, that his ideas and determination were enough to make a difference. Genevieve and Robert stayed by his side throughout the morning, trying to ease his tension. Genevieve gave him a reassuring smile. "You've done everything you could, Ellis. Now just trust in what you've built." Robert, more relaxed, joked to lighten the mood. "After this, you're going to be more popular than the basketball team," he said with a grin, making Ellis laugh, even if briefly. Their support made a difference, and with his friends behind him, Ellis took a deep breath and headed to the auditorium for the voting. When he entered, he noticed Martin observing the gathering students. The teacher stared at Ellis with a serious look, as if he were evaluating his every step. Ellis held Martin's gaze for a moment before continuing, head held high. As each student cast their vote, Ellis could feel the anticipation rising. And then, with all votes in, the principal stepped onto the stage, holding an envelope with the results. The auditorium fell silent as everyone waited. Opening the envelope, the principal looked out at the students and, with a solemn tone, announced, "Our new class leader is Ellis Parker." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Genevieve and Robert were the first to hug him, genuinely thrilled, and other classmates came over to congratulate him. Ellis felt a mix of relief and happiness, but above all, he felt he had finally claimed his place. Watching from a distance, Martin looked displeased. He approached Ellis with a stony expression but gave a brief nod. Ellis returned a restrained smile, maintaining his newfound composure. At that moment, he realized he didn't need Martin's approval to feel validated. He already had his classmates' respect, and that was enough. In the days following the election, Ellis's leadership began to make a difference. He attended student council meetings, representing his class with ideas he had discussed with his classmates. Every suggestion he made filled him with pride, knowing that he was respected and that his voice mattered. As time passed, Mr. Martin began to observe Ellis with a different perspective. The teacher, who had once looked at him with skepticism, now saw a young leader who naturally commanded respect. One morning, after a council meeting, Martin approached Ellis. "Ellis," he said with a softened tone, "I've seen your work as class leader. I may have misjudged you." Ellis took in the unexpected words, replying calmly, "Thank you, Mr. Martin. I think respect is something earned over time." With a final look, one that held genuine acknowledgement, Martin walked away. That day, as Ellis left the school, he knew he had stayed true to himself and earned his place. He had faced prejudice, endured doubts, and proved his worth. And with that realization, he walked home with a newfound peace, knowing he had changed not only his own life but the lives of those around him. If you enjoyed this moving story, watch the next video appearing on your screen. Thank you for watching, and see you there.